make sure I get all this right. He is a developer, a technical SEO, and entrepreneur with decades of industry experience who has spoken at major marketing conferences around the world. But he's also a vintage and retro computing enthusiast who makes YouTube videos about upgrading and restoring old machines. His channel, Action Retro, looks something like this.
Just how many floppy drives is too many floppy drives? Is it 34? And just what can one do with 34 USB floppy drives? I could power my car with them. Doesn't fit. Maybe I could shingle my roof with them. I can't reach it. I know. Let's RAID 0 all of these things together into one giant mega floppy and then try to install stuff to it. Grab on to your magnetic platters because this is gonna get weird. So stay tuned.
Please welcome to the ECE-101 stage, YouTuber Sean Malseed. All right, most important question first. How many subs are you up to?
I don't know, like 10? I think I did 55,000.
Yeah, I think it's close to 55,000, right? And just for some perspective, because I know people follow YouTubers probably with higher subscriber counts as well. When did you get actually started doing this?
So it was right before the pandemic started. So I guess like 2020, early 2020. You know, I watched a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I had these vintage computers lying around. And I thought, I wonder if I can document some of them. So I just started, kind of making very awkward videos about my old computers, and it kind of grew from there.
So start of the pandemic, so 2020, so just a couple of years, right?
Yeah,
and have exploded into 55,000 subscribers. I mean, you kind of described your channel already, and the focus is, of course, retro tech or retro technology. How would you describe to somebody, maybe a younger person who's grown up in the modern digital age, what retro tech means?
Yeah, so, well, I guess retro tech kind of depends on your definition of what is retro. I mean, for you and I, retro tech might be ENIAC, being, vacuum tubes being wheeled in a building. But for young people today, probably like what they grew up with, what they remember from their youth, maybe computers they aspired to own or were jealous of, but never could, lay their hands on when they were a kid. Just, kind of harkening back to a simpler time of computing. Today we have iPads and disposable laptops, but computers felt a lot different back then.
Yeah, we'll get to this in just a second. So let's see, how does one get into retro tech? And maybe start with, like, what was your first computer, and did that have an impact to steering you towards retro tech?
Yeah, I've always had kind of a weird relationship with computers. Even when I was a kid, I was interested in old computers. Like my first computer, if you're familiar with Intel processors, I had a 286 laptop back when we were well into the Pentium era. I found it at a flea market, and I was like, this thing seems cool. It was black and white, and I wonder what I can still do with it anyway. So I've always kind of been interested in retro technology from that perspective. But of course, our family had a modern computer at one point. But just over the years, I kind of never lost that interest in what came before, just learning about, where these modern computers came from, what they look like, what do they share in common with their ancestors. Yeah, so I've always had old computers lying around.
So what was kind of your first foray into the retro tech scene? I mean, so you had a modern by, the day, point in time standards of, let's say high school, middle school. But when did you start messing around with older stuff?
Yeah, so, well, I would always watch other YouTubers videos. I was really interested in this one guy, and his name is slipping in my mind, but he connected an Amiga up to the modern internet. He put all these upgrades and stuff in it, and that kind of voice gesture.
Yeah, just hold a little closer.
Yeah, that kind of piqued my interest into doing more modern things with old computers. So I started buying some. I bought an Apple II. I had my own business for a while in Philadelphia with an office, and I had this Apple II set up in the corner, and like we would do meetups for the industry I was in, but then I would have this Apple II, like I'd write a basic program displaying news and stuff. Yeah, so kind of, I mean, that was probably my first foray into actually doing stuff with retro computers. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then just for anybody who doesn't know, the Amiga was, since you mentioned the Amiga, what was the Amiga?
Yeah, so that was, there was a company, they're actually based in Pennsylvania here, but called Commodore, and they had a computer called the Amiga that was very popular, and they were often used here for video production. So they're kind of hard to find here because they're more popular overseas, but the ones you do find here a lot of times were used for video production.
All right, I'm trying to put some of our poll results up here, and of course, my Wi-Fi connection keeps going out. But our first question to our audience here was, let's see, have you built, upgraded, or modified your own computer? Right, just getting a sense of the audience here. About half have said yes. More than half said yes. A large percentage said no. A few said maybe.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes.
And one other. One other. Okay, and then in terms of what was your first computing device? Oh, let's see, maybe I have an internet connection now. There we go. There's our poll results. So in terms of our first computing device, right, for a lot of people, it's a desktop, right? So, but we also see some Dells, Windows XP, Acer, Toshiba laptop, Nova, Nintendo DS, Mom's laptop.
Nice.
That's the famous brand, Mom's laptop. Yep. Nickelodeon laptop. That one I have not heard of. That's nice. Okay. So just a sense of our audience, because of course, for me, the audience gets younger and younger every year. But it sounds like most of our audience came of age in the laptop era.
Yeah.
Right. A couple with iPods and touch-based devices as well. In terms of your pathway into technology in general, what was your, I mean, this is a class, these are all mostly first-year students at Drexel. What was your education experience like in terms of technology? And did that help get you on the path, or maybe did it dissuade you from the path? Did you start running, screaming from that path?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, college age, I wanted to, work in IT, wasn't really too sure where. So I started taking courses to get certifications like Cisco certified network engineering courses and stuff. But then I kind of just wandered into tech jobs, right? So I found myself working at a software company and it was taking a lot of time there. So I actually never even finished those certifications. I just kind of wound up doing these things. But yeah, I was always kind of focused on tech, just not laser focused on exactly what I wanted to do. Yeah.
So, I mean, and tech is so many things, right? I mean, of course, it's things like IT and networking. It's modding and upgrading, building your own computers. It's also software development. Was there, I mean, you started trying to do network certs and that sort of thing, but you've also gotten a lot into software development and other technology development for your day job as well. Do you see those things as sort of like two separate paths, or do you think they all kind of weave together for you?
Yeah, I think, these days everything kind of weaves together, right? So it's just, creating, right? So I'm not formally trained in any kind of software development. It's all stuff that I've just learned over the years by, necessity. So when I, create something, it's not, it's just building for a purpose and not building, I've never actually worked as a developer, but I find myself writing things. Yeah.
And we should, certainly share with the audience, what is your day job, right? Because you do a ton of, I'm sure it takes a ton of time to do your YouTube channel, but you also have a day job. So let's share with our audience what your day job is as well.
Yeah, so I work in technical SEO. So search engine optimization is like, my job is auditing websites and finding out like why Google can't make its way through your website. I work with a lot of big brands. Like I've worked with Urban Outfitters down here in Philadelphia. So yeah, doing technical SEO encompasses like, networking. It encompasses software development, both figuring out, why the JavaScript on a website isn't working right, and also building tools to do larger audits.
So it's not like these are totally separate sort of learning processes. I mean, trying to figure out how to get an old computer or fix an old computer, getting that working, finding the problem, isolating it, fixing it, versus like building additional software to do analytics or tracking for website marketing. Would you, to my mind, those aren't all that different.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of like the skill set and the analytical process. But I just want to clarify, do you think of those things as totally separate, or they kind of feed into one another?
Yeah, everything kind of feeds into one another, yeah, I'm finding it hard to put into words at the moment. Yeah.
So I mean, obviously you have a day job that hopefully keeps you keeps you fed and all those things. How much time, like on average per week, do you spend creating your videos?
Oh geez, yeah. So way too much time. I mean, I've been trying to do videos once per week. I've been doing that for about 2 years now. It does take quite a lot of time to, first of all, to actually do the physical project of upgrading something or working and fixing something. And also the editing takes quite a long time. And when I first started, I'd never really done video editing before. So I kind of learned as I went and, used different bits of software. At the very beginning, I thought I'd do the whole thing from Linux, which turns out was a big mistake because video editing software in Linux is a bit behind the times. Eventually I found DaVinci Resolve, which had a Linux version. I was using that for a bit and I was, okay, I'll just switch to Mac. So at this point, I'm pretty good at video editing. So it doesn't take me, 16 hours like it did at the very beginning. But now, it takes me, just editing at night, like 2 days to edit a video. So I'd say a good 15 to 20 hours worth of work though, still.
So what is your video editing platform now? Like what's your workflow?
Yeah. So I have an old DSLR. It's a Lumix DH5 or something, or GH4, which is old. But it was the first one that did 4K video. So I found a good deal on the used one. So I use that plus an audio interface that feeds right into the camera. And that saves a lot of time not having to sync audio. And then I take basically the video files from the SD card into my MacBook Pro. And now I've gotten a lot better at DaVinci Resolve. So that's what I use. Yeah.
All right. Still using Resolve. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. DaVinci Resolve, just in case nobody knows, I mean, another video editing platform, it's cross-platform, which is nice about it.
Yeah.
Do you, in terms of when you publish something versus when you start, and I know that there's not an easy answer to this, but like, so how far are you working ahead before you, like, do you have 10 videos in the pipeline right now that haven't been published yet that you're working on, or you have like one, or is it just like, oh no, this is the last one, I'm right here and I publish? And you don't have to tell us the whole secret, but
no, there is no secret. That's probably the hardest part is I've been trying to make it more organized. And at one point I was maybe 2 videos ahead. But right now, I have like my list of ideas that I go off of and, getting parts in to do various repairs. But I'm not any videos ahead at the moment, unfortunately, although I'd like to be at least 1 video ahead. But yeah, I'm going to start filming a video tonight. It's going to go up on Saturday.
well, we could take some B-roll here if you want to just, get
Yeah.
And your goal is to publish once a week. Is that right?
Yeah.
And obviously I've been subscribed to your channel for a while, and yes, it's been very, very regular aside from holidays and that sort of thing. Yeah. Are there, I guess I would ask, how hard is it to stick to that once a week schedule? And is that, I mean, deadlines drive a lot of things, right? And so having that deadline, say, oh, I gotta post.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How much of that kind of keeps you going?
Yeah. So At times it's been difficult because, doing a repair on a computer might fail. And then, what do I do? Just not post a video or something. So it's kind of forced me to uh, think about how far I want to go in a project before I start it, think about what I can make a video of if I fail. Can I still like make a story about like, the history of a computer, and then I do a fix and it fails, and can I figure out why it failed, what the next steps are? And I've done it a couple times. My most recent video, I think the computer, I got quite far in overclocking an industrial 90s computer, trying to play like Doom and Wolfenstein on a computer that was not intended for that at all. And I got to the point where it successfully overclocked. I put it back together, and then the screen was just white. And I couldn't get any display. And then unfortunately, that's where I left off that video. Although funny enough, 2 days later, I was just tinkering with it and I fixed it.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I've seen that video, and if you're at all interested, you should check it out. I mean, one of the things he does with a lot of the computers that you refurbish, restore, is to see how well it runs Wolfenstein 3D, right? And Wolf 3D, for those of you who don't know, is the precursor to Doom. It was one of the first games written by id Software and John Carmack, and it was really the first widespread successful first-person shooter, right? So it runs on a lot of things. But it's always hilarious when you try to get like this ancient, like pen-based laptop thing to run, Wolf 3D, because it was never designed to do that. So on the one side, definitely check those out. That's a lot of fun. I guess what I want to ask you though, I mean, your style has evolved as well. And you said you only seriously got started with this a couple of years ago. So like in your early videos, you're not even on camera. Right, it's just like your arms and hands, and it's really fun to watch because you just use like hand gestures. And over lunch, you were telling me the story of how that happened, so I want you to tell that story. But then also, I mean, just in terms of just the evolution of your style, because in your newest videos, you'll say, "Oh, you can go check out this video," but the production quality was maybe not what maybe so. So if you want to just speak to those things, I'm both the evolution of the hands and then the evolution of your style.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. When I first started making these videos, we lived in Philly for a long time. I lived in Kensington. We had a tiny little house. So it was 2 bedrooms, one main bedroom, and then the second bedroom was more like a closet. And that's where I was filming videos in. So literally, the room was too small to get myself in frame. So it was just, a matter of my arm was in it because that's all, the computer in the arm was all that would fit in the video. And it kind of became like a running gag. It was like, oh, just a wacky waving arm. But then eventually we got a bigger house with an actual basement. So yeah, just it's a pragmatic reason.
Well, and it's not just, I don't want to give you short trips because not just your hands and your arms. Of course, you have some pretty large tattoos as well. Do you mind sharing? Do you want to show? Like, just roll up your sleeve.
Yeah, so and actually it's kind of funny. I would go to like display computers at an event, right? And then people would recognize me and they'd be like, you know how I recognize you? Tattoos. Yeah, because I was just the arm.
Right, because it's just your arms, and your arms have these great tattoos on them.
Yeah.
And you're doing all this gesturing.
Yeah, so it'd either be my voice. Apparently I have a distinctive voice. I don't know what that means. Or the tattoos is how people used to recognize me at computer events.
So another thing I really love about your videos and why I enjoy your series so much is because they don't always have a happy ending. Right?
No.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of you follow channels where it's just, hey, we built this thing and it's awesome and it was so easy, right? Your videos are like, hey, I struggled with this and we got to this thing and it was working. Oh, then it stopped working.
Yeah.
Right. Which is so much like engineering classes, right? You get the thing and it's working. Oh, I think it's working. And then, oh, it broke. So I guess I'll just ask you, was that sort of a conscious choice on your part, or is that just the way the cookie crumbles?
Yeah, I mean, again, I guess it goes back to just, I really set a goal to do a video a week. I don't know where I got that idea from, but then I just kind of stuck to it. So, sometimes, it's the reality of working with old computers and components that are 20 years past their anticipated use life. Sometimes they explode. So, in order to keep a video and, to try to still make it entertaining and useful, you can roll with the good stuff and the bad stuff, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and when he says explode, he's not kidding, right? That these things can actually explode because
Oh,
there's,
sure.
you know, there can be old capacitors, and the older formulation of capacitors, there is a very, very well, there's a shelf life for these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And after a while, they literally do kind of they kind of
Yeah,
explode.
yeah. And plus, there was a time in the '90s called the capacitor plague. I don't know if you've heard of that, but yeah, there was a whole thing about corporate intrigue and espionage where somebody stole a capacitor formula from somebody else, but they got it wrong, and they built all these capacitors with the wrong formula, and they didn't last that long. So if you try to turn one of those on today, a good chance it'll explode. It's exciting.
All right, I'm gonna check in on our second poll here. I guess I have to reload this page. Here we go. All right, so we asked the audience, what are some of your favorite YouTube channels here? So we've got Urban Rescue Ranch, Dank Pods. I know Dank Pods. Oh, Linus Tech Tips.
Yeah.
Sure, Linus Tech Tips. MKBHD. All right, let's hear
One
from
of my
Marquez.
favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. Veritasium.
Oh,
Right,
that's
so yeah, those are good ones. All right, and then whoops. All right, that's a reload. All right, and I asked them how much time per week do you spend watching YouTube, and I said that they can include TikTok and Twitch if they want to. So let's see. The answer with the most responses, I may have a problem. But so it looks like the average is 10 or so hours a week, around there, right? So that's a lot. I would, you know, and again, and hopefully we're not including like Netflix streaming or HBO Max or anything in this, right? So that's a lot of time on YouTube. Just again, YouTube is the go-to place, right, for information and entertainment, right, for a lot of things. And on that sort of information side, we also asked our audience, for how many of your classes do you seek extra material, right? And it looks like for the most respondents, it's a few classes, 1 to 2, right? That there's good material out there on YouTube to help. Some of them, you know, about 20% say all of them, right? Which also makes sense. You know, I think we talked about this last week a little bit, you know, my perspective, and I think the perspective of a lot of professors, not all, but a lot of professors, is that YouTube is this amazing resource, right? That hopefully you're getting stuff from your classes, right? And learning stuff there. But if you need supplemental material, there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube, right? The flip side, we talked about this over lunch as well, I'll love to get your feedback on this, is that there's also a lot of junk. There's a lot of crap out on YouTube, right? And so sometimes it's the process of filtering out, right? Okay, this seems to really solve my problem, answer my question, versus, oh, this is garbage, right? And I know there's a lot of that in the retro tech world as well.
Sure, yeah, you know, there's a lot of what might be very trivial controversies, but you know, the right way to remove a capacitor. So there was somebody who was, you know, showing how they remove capacitors, and they would just, you know, grab them with pliers and twist them off. And they're like, yeah, this has never failed for me. Go ahead and do it. Unfortunately, you know, with old computers, that can just rip the traces off. So, you know, that person had a very big following, very confidently said to do that. That is not what you should do. You should desolder them so you don't ruin the motherboard of a, you know, hard to find vintage computer.
What's your stance on retro brighting?
Oh, I do it.
Huh?
I do it.
You totally do it? Okay.
Yeah.
So again, retro brighting, because plastics over time age and they get discolored, right? They turn yellow. They also get very brittle, which is bad.
Yeah.
So retro brighting is a process where you can, you know, basically use bleach or, you know, chemical solvents and put it out in the sun, and it kind of restores some of the color, right? So
Yeah.
you get to see a computer or device what it looked like. But there is some controversy, right, about whether it's good, permanent. So,
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process. It's UV light and peroxide. They react, and through chemical reaction, remove whatever the yellowing is and can bring it back to its original color. Some people say it makes the plastics brittle, but the plastics are already brittle. So if you're displaying something, I think it can be nice to bring it back to that original look. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna get to our device here in just a second, but one more YouTube question, because again, I think our students might be interested. In terms of the economics of YouTube, right? I mean, you have, you know, a substantial number of subscribers, over 50,000, right? And I'm sure you get some from ads, you get some YouTube ads. Then of course you have sponsors as well, because from your videos you have Squarespace or PCBWay, that sort of thing. Can you just talk about like what are the economics of YouTube like, and how about this? The general question is, does it feel worth it to you for the time that you spend and having 55,000 subscribers?
It's an interesting thing to think about, because when I first started, it was just, I was doing this thing as a hobby, right? So I wasn't, you know, planning to make any money from it. I was just showing off things I already had. As it picked up steam, I found that people, you know, sponsors were starting to reach out to sponsor video. And then I thought, okay, well, I can just use that money and dump it right back into eBay and buy ridiculous computers. I have a very understanding wife who lets me control the whole basement, basically. It just kind of spiraled from there. So now it's a question of, am I breaking even or making money from a video? And fortunately now, to my personal shock, I do make money from these videos, which was never my intention. You know, I figure the cost of parts, you know, how many videos I can make per a particular device, and then the revenue coming in from ads and sponsorships and Patreon. So yeah, it actually does turn into something profitable.
If one of our students, well, maybe we do have some YouTubers out there. I don't even know. Any YouTubers out there? Anybody have like an active channel they're putting a lot of time into? Nobody that wants to admit it yet. Okay. But if somebody was wanting to start a channel, like what, you know, and wanted to at least, you know, try to break even, what sort of, do you have any advice on that? Like a breakdown of, you know, oh, should you definitely start a Patreon first, or should you just try to get as many subs as possible? Or what's your advice there?
Well, I found consistency is the key. You know, YouTube has an algorithm. The algorithm looks for certain things in a channel before it starts promoting the videos. One of them is consistency and people sticking around to watch the video for a certain amount of % of the video. So really just creating a schedule and sticking to it, and then making a video that is interesting that somebody's going to watch. And, you know, from there, you can just start with whatever equipment you already have. You can use your smartphone and you can, you know, record the audio there. And if it sounds halfway decent, you know, it's the content that really makes a difference. Yeah.
Okay. And if you don't mind, and you don't have to show this if you don't, I mean, roughly kind of what's your intake between those different sources? Do you get a lot from YouTube ads, or is it mostly sponsors and Patreon? Or
yeah, so the most consistent right now is sponsors. You know, they I don't know what algorithms they use, but at a certain point, if your channel hits certain metrics, they just start reaching out to you. So then I've been able to kind of figure out what the sweet spot in pricing is to do, like what they call an integration inside the video. So I'll do, you know, like a 15 to 30-second spot where I talk about a product, and then I've negotiated a rate for that. And sometimes they do like Squarespace signed on for a 3-month deal, and PCBWay has been doing it with me for years now, almost the life of the channel. So that's the most consistent, and the amount of money I make from that is about equal to the amount I get from YouTube ads. But at some point I've heard, you know, sponsorships really make the most money. And are the most consistent, especially on platforms outside of YouTube, like TikTok, that don't really have a great advertising revenue model. And then of course Patreon is great. Yeah.
All right, here, let me put up one more survey. So Karis, if we can also put this in the chat. So one last survey, but let's turn to what this is. What have you brought? And you know, how old is this thing?
So this is the latest in modern Apple computing.
That's right. This is the unannounced MacBook Pro.
Yeah, this is the M2 MacBook Pro. What this is actually a faithful replica of the original Apple I production model. There's actually a small but very dedicated following to this particular computer. If you've never heard of the Apple I, well, it came before the Apple II. Apple II was actually where Apple found all of their success. This was more of a proof of concept. So Apple was started by Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and then a guy, I always forget his name. But Wozniak had this computer kind of drawn out beforehand, and Steve Jobs decided to help him market it. So there were very few of these actually ever built and sold, the real ones. So the real ones, they sell at like big auction houses for $500,000. This is not a big real one. This is a faithful reproduction, but it uses all new old stock, but period correct components. So this computer was targeted towards hobbyists back in the 70s, released in 1976. Back then, if you wanted a computer, you were buying a schematic for the computer and then going out and buying components or buying a kit that you had to solder together yourself. This was one of the first computers that not only you could go into a shop and buy, and some of them had their own cases built for it, which that wasn't really a thing in the late 70s. But you could basically, they actually had you build your own power supply. So sold the computer without a power supply. You had to buy the transformers yourself and put it together. Instructions are in the manual. That's a little weird these days. But other than that, it was like plug and play. You could buy it, plug it into a TV, and have a working computer. It was one of the first that could do that. It was also one of the first computers that had both video and the computer on the same board. A lot of times you would build a computer, but the computer didn't have any way to output video. You had to connect to it from a terminal. And the terminal was a separate device with a screen and a keyboard that had nothing to do with the computer itself. They would just talk to each other. Yeah, but this, technically, the way this computer is constructed, it's the terminal is a separate device and the computer is a separate device. And they talk to each other, but they don't really know about each other. So it's kind of two devices on one board, which is, absolutely wild by today's perspective. But back then it was kind of revolutionary.
Yeah. So there's no case, right? The Apple one never had a case, no standardized case. So you always, if you happen to see one on eBay or just in a news article, right? There's never like a standardized case. I mean, this is a replica, right? If this were an original, what would it go for on eBay?
Well, so there's one listed on eBay right now. It's been listed for a long time at $1.5 million. He's probably not going to get that. That's a little bit of a dreaming price. Really, the originals sell at auction for, I think the highest was like 700 for a working one that had, there was one almost standard case, but it was actually built by the shop that sold these. It wasn't built by Apple. Yeah.
And then talk about this keyboard. And I'm going to put this in greater context. My son, who's 15, right, he's a gamer, is obsessed with having a mechanical keyboard.
Yeah.
Right? This is a mechanical keyboard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what vintage is this?
Yeah. So this is a reproduction of a Datanetics keyboard. So the Apple one never came with an Apple keyboard. You had to buy your own keyboard that would be compatible with it. So Datanetics was one such company. So this is actually made by a friend of mine in Hong Kong who builds this by hand. But yeah, it uses modern keyboard mechanical switches. I forget what ones exactly. But yeah, it's a reproduction. Actually, this would work with any other computer of a similar vintage.
All right. So I have to break, the somewhat bad news to our audience in that in bringing it over here, it does work, but he fired it up and it chose not to work right now.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the things about working with vintage computers. Like this power supply I built myself using new old stock components. So these transformers are from the 70s. And I'm pretty sure that the big one failed because the computer is getting 5 volts, but not 12 volts. It worked this morning and then I brought it here and I guess I jostled something or something shorted.
It always comes down to power. That's why I tell all the students that, if something's not working, first check the power.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not even just, is the power plugged in or is it turned on? It's like, are you getting the right kind of power? Are you getting 5 volts, 12 volts? Check those lines because a lot of times that's the issue. But you have this fantastic video on your site where you, obviously show this off, but you add a very special feature as well. Do you want to talk about that? And I think that has to do with this card on the side here.
Yeah, so I brought an example here. This is an Apple One jukebox card, but the Apple One was also interesting in that it had an expansion port that not a lot of computers had any kind of expandability, but the Apple One did. So there's actually people today building strange cards that work with the Apple One using like microcontrollers that it's funny, they have like thousands of times more power in the expansion card than the computer itself. But like this card here has every bit of Apple One software ever written on this card that you can, wasn't really actually a lot of software written for it, along with some modern software. So somebody wrote like a 2048 clone, which is pretty funny to play on here. And then somebody actually created a Wi-Fi card for this thing. So using a microcontroller, you can connect to a Wi-Fi network as long as you have only uppercase letters in the SSID, because there's no lowercase on this computer. So yeah, I would connect this to a hotspot on my cell phone and then connect to the broader internet, be able to actually visit a URL from an Apple One using 70s components, which is a little bit funny.
So again, there is a great video on Sean's website, Action Retro, or his YouTube channel. Let me disconnect that guy. All right, final YouTube poll here. Let's see, let me reload the responses. All right, we asked our audience to name your favorite classic computer. Right, oh, by a nose, the Macintosh wins over the IBM PC. Apple II is not too bad either. Only 3 votes for the ENIAC. Only 1 vote for the TRS-80, the Trash 80. Those are classic.
Yeah.
A couple for the Amiga and a couple for the 64. All right, and then we asked, what current computer or device would you most want to keep and preserve for future generations? Right. iPhone is big up there. Xbox, MacBook, Nintendo Switch. Okay. There are some computers, and this is a question for you actually. There are some computers, historical computers, that are real classics that sort of retain that charm and value over time. And then there are others that are really just kind of, oh yeah, this was a thing, but it lasted a year and then we threw it away.
Yeah.
Are there factors that you think go into that? What makes something last? What's worth preserving, and what's kind of like, oh yeah, that was just a generic PC?
Well, I guess that's kind of interesting because for me personally, I love those old generic, just garbage computers, like an old 486, no name, that kind of computer holds a lot of nostalgia for me because that's what all my friends had, right? So part of it, I think, is what did you see as a kid? What did your friends have? And also like what evokes the feeling of that time. It's like the TRS-80 all in one kind of silver, very 80s looking computer with a green phosphorus screen. I mean, that really feels like the 80s when you're using that computer. Apple II, there were so many of them and so many people used them in school. They were used in classrooms all the time. Even me, like when I was a kid, I guess my school district didn't have a lot of money because they were well past their prime, but we had a lot of Apple II set up and, we would learn BASIC and stuff on them. Yeah.
Okay, just a reminder to our class, if you want to ask a question, type it into the week 2 channel on Teams. Ask a question and I'll try to squeeze it in here. For someone who wants to get involved with the retro tech world, the scene, whether it's on YouTube or whether, what do you think is the most important? What would you start with? Is it tools? Is it a particular computer? Is it an event? What are some places people can go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could get involved. I mean, there's a ton of great content on YouTube. If you remember a computer from your youth, there's somebody on YouTube obsessed with it who's making content about it or who's upgraded it or done something. I mean, that's a pretty low effort thing you could do. I mean, if you want to get a little bit more involved, I mean, Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace looking for old computers is an interesting thing to do. But there's also things like the Vintage Computer Festival in Wall, New Jersey. I like to display there. If I ever fix this thing, that'll be on display there. But a lot of people, there's way more people than you would expect. We bring a lot of crazy computers there. So it's, basically 2 buildings full of people demonstrating extremely rare vintage computers that you can walk up and touch and play with. From, an Apple One, they have PDP-11 like mainframe computers set up that you could just go and play a game on, which, when people back in the day didn't have that kind of an access to it. There's a big community of people who are really interested in it. Yeah, this kind of thing.
So, obviously, I follow your channel, so I'm a retro tech enthusiast myself. And, my basic reason is because it's cool, right? But also because I grew up with some of these technologies and there's this nostalgic element. Are there other things that drive you in terms of retro tech? Why should someone care about old computers, right?
Yeah.
Most of this stuff, this stuff was made before any of these folks were born.
Sure.
Right. Why should they care?
Yeah. It's interesting to me to just see where technology came from, right? So kind of everything that we're using today is still just abstraction on top of abstraction on top of this same kind of general principle, right? It's like when you're using the Apple II, when you're using this Apple One, you're loading software directly into memory and then accessing that memory location by typing it into the keyboard to run the software, right? So that's just, as close to the bare metal as you can get. Modern computers are just abstracted on top of that to the point where we have touch screens and Windows 11 and all that stuff. Yeah, so it's very interesting to learn kind of the progression of history. You kind of feel like you have a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. All right, class, last chance to ask any question. I haven't gotten many here, so please do ask if you have a question. There are a couple other reasons, I guess, that come to my mind as an educator. Well, one, of course, I think learning a more primitive form of technology certainly informs the modern stuff. There are some decisions that were made for good reasons. There are some design decisions in terms of hardware or software that have been made just for kind of because we could reasons throughout history. And sometimes having that perspective is really useful. There's the preservation aspect, right? There is so much, Internet Archive is great, but actually it's not everything. And you may generate stuff, right? Whether it's you put it on the cloud these days, maybe it'll get preserved, but maybe not. And if you have your own content, I have a lot of content I made in college, in high school even, that was originally on, floppy drives off of old PCs that I have tried to maintain or at least bring forward so I never lose that, right? And so there's that preservation aspect. There's still legacy stuff, right?
Yeah.
That gets used in very weird places, right? Again, this is before their time, but all the Y2K stuff around the 2000s, where those were old computers that nobody cared about, and yet all of a sudden they were very important, right? And there are sometimes legacy issues that come up like that. I don't know if you've encountered any other situations like that where having a piece of retro tech actually solved a problem, or having some knowledge about that solved a problem.
Yeah, there's definitely legacy software that only runs on old computers. That's a big career these days, actually. If you know how to program in like COBOL, you can get a pretty secure job working at institutions that have never been able to upgrade from their old mainframes. Yeah.
All right, some quick questions from the audience. Let's see. Do you think that Apple One you could get it to run Elden Ring?
Oh yeah, it's on there already. It won't boot right now because of this transformer, but otherwise, yeah.
Awesome. What are some of your favorite YouTube sites to follow or YouTube channels to follow?
Yeah, so I do watch a lot of retro tech YouTube. So like 8-Bit Guy. Let's see, LGR is a big one that's very entertaining. This Is Not Compute is a great one. There's a lot of ones specific to kind of old Apple Macintosh computers like Mac 84, Macintosh Librarian. She really focuses on like the software side, which is really interesting. I watch a lot of car YouTube as well.
Nice. All right, we're just about out of time. I want to remind our class, there will be your reflection due next week. Give it up for our special guest, Malseed.
Thank you.
Follow his channel, Action Retro, on YouTube. If you want to get a closer look at the Apple One, you are welcome to come up. Thanks. See you next week.